Gordon. So, before I get started, I'm just going to make it very clear. This is not the setup I'm planning on using for the actual presentation. However, I'm going to plug this into my TV so it's like big. However, it's unfortunately what I got right now. So, basically, just to get started, so thank you for watching. Normally I greet everyone, but it's just you, so hi. So, my topic is about the female integration into the Air Force, or I guess all branches of the military, but mainly focusing on the Air Force. I'm going to talk, so the reason that this topic is very important for me is because my entire family has always gone into the military. We've always been part of that kind of community, and my parents specifically both went into the Air Force. They met in the Air Force. I was raised as an Air Force kid, all of that stuff. And also, not to mention the fact that I personally, after college, am planning on going into the Air Force. They're paying for me to go to school. So it's very important to see how I will be treated. For me, it's very important to see how I'm going to be treated in the Air Force and just kind of see whether or not it's something that I want to do, which through this presentation I realize it is, because they've actually done an amazing job of integrating their female soldiers into the Air Force. So basically, I'm just going to kind of go all throughout history, every aspect I can imagine, to see how women were treated in the Air Force and how they have come kind of as a group and how they've developed and how the Air Force has developed around them. So the first thing I will be talking about is the careers and opportunities that have been presented for women in the Air Force. So in terms of enlisted soldiers as well as officers, just kind of the equality they've gained and the jobs that they've been able to do and also the jobs that they haven't been able to do. So then after I go through that, I'm going to talk about the differences in the fundamentals, so including personal hygiene, a little bit of sexual harassment, motherhood, pregnancy, as well as the differences in the basic training and the basic physical fitness requirements. Anyway, and then after I discuss all of that, I'm finally going to look kind of where all these advancements have taken us as a group, as well as just a group of not only a group in the Air Force, but as well as the Air Force as a whole, specifically focusing on the draft, as well as a new branch of the military called the Space Force, which has recently been introduced by President Trump. So, just hopping right into it. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about are the careers and opportunities that have been presented to women in the Air Force, starting with the introduction of female pilots in World War II, which is what these amazing women here are. So, when World War II happened, the need for pilots went from like here to here, like it was tremendously raised. And so, because of that, the Air Force was forced to take women with prior flight experience, just kind of as a hobby or a job, whatever it may be. These women were not allowed to fly combat missions whatsoever. They didn't see any active duty or anything of that sort. They basically just kind of transported supplies and dropped off soldiers where they needed to go. However, this was the first really active involvement of women in the Air Force and kind of women in the military altogether. Before this, they were just secretaries, cooks, maids, etc., just kind of standard 40s housewife jobs, right? So from this first picture, which is kind of the foundation, everything just getting higher and higher and higher. After World War II, women were integrated as officers. They held positions of power. They were able to command squadrons of men and basically do everything that all the male officers were able to do and all of the people in power were able to do. However, they were still not able to fly or kind of just be in any active duty combat missions or kind of until 2013, which is when women were officially allowed in the active duty zone, or the war zone as it's kind of known. So then after that integration, women were completely involved in every aspect. As far as I could tell, as far as my research could tell, there were no jobs that women were excluded from this point on. The integration at first into active duty combat was a little rough. For example, in the Army Ranger School, 19 women were put into it and only 2 were able to graduate. And so basically that kind of how that went was pretty smooth, pretty well. Everything did what it was supposed to do. So just kind of from that point on, women were able to gain more and more confidence, more and more power so for example, there's this one woman, her name is Heather Wilson, I'm pretty sure you've heard of her. She was born in New Jersey, and then she went to USAFA, which is the United States Air Force Academy, and she graduated in 1982. So then after serving in the Air Force for a while, because we were forced to for like, I think it's 4 years, after serving for 4 years, she moved to New Mexico with her family, and she became a member of the House of Representatives for New Mexico, and she won that election in 1998 and continued to serve in that house until she became the secretary of the entire Air Force in 2017. So not only was she the first woman to do so, but she was also from Mexico, go us, which is really, really awesome because that kind of just proved that women were able to hold these positions of power and that they could do everything that a guy could do. Literally, there's no exceptions. So yeah, that was kind of just how women have gained power and how they've been able to integrate into the Air Force, and what opportunities they were presented and how they also had to kind of fight for those opportunities. So just moving on from that, I'm going to talk about the differences in the fundamentals, so specifically focusing on the differences in women and men biologically, as well as what they go through. So just kind of starting on what they go through. Every soldier is subject to physical fitness tests as well as basic training. So the basic training is exactly the same. They still do the same survival training, learn how to shoot, learn technology, all of that stuff is all the same. The only thing that's really different is the physical fitness. I can speak from this from personal aspects because when I was trying to get my ROTC scholarship, I had to do a physical fitness test, which the requirements for me were, in terms of sit-ups, push-ups, the run, everything like that was significantly less than what men had to do. So the biggest argument with this one is that people believe that if they're in the middle of an active duty mission, the bad guy isn't just going to say, oh, you're a woman, you don't have to climb or run as far, like, we'll just let you do what you can do. But the reason that this has been debunked is that these tests, even though they're less than what men even though they have to do less than what men have, it still proves that these women are to their absolute physical best. They're the most in shape that they ever been, and that they can still do everything that men can do. It's just that men are naturally stronger and faster, so they naturally have to be tested more. But the test that the woman goes through still proves that that is their absolute physical best shape and that they're doing everything that they can do. So that is why that kind of has been debunked and is no longer seen as a huge issue. So kind of just going on through that, I'm going to talk about personal hygiene of women compared to men. And that is an issue because women have certain issues, specifically menstrual cycles, that men do not have to go through, and therefore they require different amount of supplies, they have different necessities, etc. And so this was an issue for a really long time because there aren't always the ability to have 2 separate bathrooms or to have 2 separate living areas. And so for a long time, women were excluded from a lot of things because they just simply didn't have a bathroom to use. For example, in the Navy, women weren't allowed on submarines until 2010 because there was no room for 2 bathrooms, which I think is kind of bogus. I think if a woman wants to be on a submarine, she'd be willing to use the same bathroom as the men. And then the other issue that these differences in biology has caused is, of course, sexual harassment. The military is historically very masculine, it's very much so dominated by men, and sexual harassment has, of course, been a big issue. It has been verbal. For example, I've heard multiple times, you can't fly, you know why they call it a cockpit, right? I've heard that multiple times personally. It's an insult, and it's something that I am planning on proving wrong. And but of course, there's also the physical sexual harassment, which is extremely unfortunate. It's very sad, and I feel very bad for the women who have to go through that. However, as a positive, the Air Force is by far the best at dealing with that, keeping women safe, punishing the men who do it, kind of just dealing with that whole situation in general, which is super positive because it shows that the Air Force cares about this. The Air Force cares about their women and cares about what they have to go through. So while that is still a huge issue, it is something that is definitely being fought and has definitely been improving over time. So then the last issue with the fundamentals is that women were made to go through a pregnancy, maybe many pregnancies, and give birth to children. That's just our evolutionary job. There's women who don't want to do that, but that is technically our evolutionary job. And then, so of course, there's those women who are mothers and who are pregnant, And so they have to go through the issue of when do they have to stop working when they're pregnant, and they also have to go through the issue of leaving their children behind. So of course the male soldiers who are dads have to do the same, or have to leave their children as well, but it's not totally the same thing, because if you have to leave your newborn baby behind, then you can't take care of them, and your maternal instincts go crazy, right? And so this is a big issue. It's something that women have to deal with a lot emotionally. However, a lot of female soldiers have stated that it makes them feel like a proud parent, and makes them feel that they're setting a good example for their children, that they're sacrificing their own well-being in order to do what's right for their country. And then it makes them feel like a good person. As well, the Air Force overall is doing an amazing job of accommodating for these women, whether they're single mothers or they have another enlisted father or husband, or even if just he's a stay-at-home dad and he's struggling. The Air Force does an amazing job of supporting them financially. They support them in terms of like personal support, giving them caregivers, etc., as well as they do an amazing job of setting up accommodations for families to move. If the mother does have to be stationed somewhere else, they move them to different bases or even houses outside of the base, whatever fits the family's needs best. And so while that is something that women have to struggle with, it is something that the Air Force does a great job of accommodating, and they know that it's a struggle. So kind of just, where does all of this go? What does it mean? Why does it matter? So kind of just going into the future, the two biggest obvious areas, in my opinion, where it's going to go are the draft and then the Space Force, which is what this logo here is. So in terms of the draft, the biggest issue with the draft, so just to be clear, I'm going to clarify a few things about the draft. So the draft has not been active since the Vietnam War. It is no longer active. It is now called selective service. So when men turn 18, they are required by law to sign up for the selective service, and it is technically a federal offense if they dodge the draft. The selective service, the odds of it ever being used again, in my opinion, are very slim, because America already has a very strong military, and they already have as many soldiers as they could ever possibly need. I personally don't think that it's going to be an issue, and I don't think that the selective service, to be honest, is ever going to be used again. So just kind of getting that out of the way. The biggest argument for women in the selective service is that women want equality. We want equality, 1,000%, we do. But the only issue is that we can't pick and choose where that equality is given to us. We can't say, oh, we want this, but we don't want this. So many people argue that because we do want that equality, we will have to sign up for the draft, because if guys have to do it and we want the same rights, then, which we deserve the same rights, but if we do want the same rights, then we have to sign up for it as well. So I see that happening very soon personally. I don't know if it'll happen within this presidential term, but I do see it happening very soon. And like I said, I don't think it's going to be a super big deal, just because the selective service isn't really active right now, and so it's not going to be a super big deal. But then the other place that the military is heading to is to the Space Force. So kind of how the Air Force branched off from the Army during World War II, the Space Force branched off from the Air Force. The Air Force was used to control everything in space, control the satellites, the missions, everything you could possibly imagine, rovers, whatever. And now there's this branch called the Space Force, because we are predicting a larger involvement in space very soon, and so we created a new branch to focus specifically on that. So the Space Force will be the first branch to allow women amongst its ranks from the very beginning. And I personally think it's going to be very interested to see how things develop when there are women in charge and when women's inputs are actually being heard. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if it is developed differently, if it does happen differently, or honestly, if it just happens exactly the same. It'll be an interesting experiment, in my opinion. But basically, kind of just to sum everything up, and I think that the Air Force has done the absolute best job of integrating women into their forces compared to all other branches. Of course, there is still a good amount of room for improvement, especially in terms of the personal aspect of being a woman, in terms of sexual harassment, giving birth, being a mother, all of that. There's still room for improvement. However, the amount of opportunities and careers that have been opened for women is tremendous. We are much more equal within the ranks of the Air Force than we ever were before. And I'm excited to see how much further it goes. So thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.